My daughter-in-law took a business trip to Phoenix for 10 days. The morning her rental car disappeared around the corner of our street, my son, who hadn't taken a single step in 6 years, walked into the kitchen, gripped the counter with both hands, and told me we needed to get out of the house before she came back. I dropped my coffee cup. It shattered on the tile. Neither of us looked down before I go any further. Take a breath and hit that like button. Subscribe if you're new here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. My name is Gerald Holt. I'm 67 years old, a retired county fire marshal from Savannah, Georgia. And what I'm about to tell you is the story of how the most dangerous thing I ever faced wasn't a burning building. It was the woman living under my roof. It started on a Tuesday in late October. My daughter-in-law, Diane, had been planning this trip for months. A pharmaceutical sales conference, she said. Nashville to Phoenix. For connecting flights, 10 days at a convention center hotel. She had her luggage lined up by the door 2 days early, matching cream-colored bags, each one tagged with little gold initials, DC, H, Diane, Carol Holt. She had taken my son's last name like she had taken everything else that belonged to him. My son's name is Caleb. He's 42 years old. 6 years ago, he was a high school football coach in Chatham County. The kind of man who could command 60 teenage boys with nothing but a low voice and a steady stare. He coached for consecutive regional championships. Parents drove from 3 counties over to have their sons play for him. He was large and certain and full of direction, the kind of man people naturally followed. Then came the accident. A rainy November night on Highway 17. A pickup truck ran a red light and caught Caleb's driver's side door at 50 miles an hour. When the paramedics pulled him out of the wreckage, the trauma surgeon told us his spinal cord had been compressed, not severed. Compressed. At the T10 vertebrae. The ER physician used the word temporary. He said with proper rehabilitation, Caleb could expect significant motor recovery within 12 to 18 months. That was the last time I heard the word temporary used about my son's condition. Diane took control of everything within 72 hours. She had the private specialist flown in from Atlanta, a quiet man with a smooth handshake, and a business card that listed 3 medical boards. He reviewed the imaging, spoke with Diane in the hallway for 20 minutes while I waited in the family room, and then told me, with genuine-looking sorrow in his eyes, that the compression had created permanent nerve damage, that the earlier assessment had been premature, that Caleb would not walk again. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He had the credentials. Diane had the paperwork, and I was a 61-year-old man who fixed fire code violations for a living, not a neurologist. I moved into their guest room that same month. For 6 years, my retirement meant waking at 6 every morning to help my son out of bed, lower him into his chair, wheel him to the bathroom, and sit with him while Diane prepared his breakfast with the careful, theatrical devotion of a woman who wanted everyone in earshot to notice how much she sacrificed. She would grind his medications into his orange juice, a combination of what she called nerve stabilizers and anti-spasm compounds, and hand him the glass with the same gentle smile. Every single morning. He was always foggy by 9 o'clock, always exhausted by noon, always asleep before 8 at night. I thought it was the injury. I thought it was grief. I thought it was what happened to a man when his body betrayed him and his world collapsed to the size of a wheelchair. The morning Diane left for Phoenix, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, quiet. Not the tense, eggshell quiet of a house where someone is always performing, real quiet. The kind that settles into the walls when a storm finally moves past. I poured my coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching the oak leaves collect in the corner of the driveway. I planned to take Caleb out to the back porch once he woke up, just sit in the October air, maybe watch the game on the little outdoor television his buddy Ray had installed last summer. Nothing scheduled, no clipboard, no syrupy instructions left on the refrigerator. In Diane's looping handwriting, I heard the sound at 743, not the soft wheel roll of his chair. On the hallway hardwood, something heavier, a shoulder hitting the wall, a sharp intake of breath, then a thud that rattled the picture frames. I moved fast, 30 years of fire investigation. trained me to move toward the sound, not away from it. I came around the corner of the hallway, with my heart already ahead of my body, and I stopped so hard my socks slid on the floor. Caleb was standing. He had both palms pressed flat against the wall, his arms shaking like load-bearing beams in a structure that wasn't built for the weight. His legs, the legs I had lifted and positioned and strapped into footrests for 2,190 consecutive days, were bent at the knees and trembling, but they were holding him. He was breathing like a man surfacing from deep water, each breath a deliberate, desperate act. "Son," I said it so quietly, I'm not sure any sound came out at all. He turned his head toward me. His face was gray and soaked with sweat, and his eyes were the clearest I had seen them. In 6 years, not foggy, not drifting, sharp and terrified, and completely present. "Dad," he rasped, "we have to go. Right now, before it wears off." I didn't ask what it was. I crossed the hallway in 4 steps and got my arm under his shoulder. He was heavier than I remembered, or maybe I was older. Probably both. He pushed against the wall, found his footing, and together we made it down the hall in a slow grinding walk that took 3 minutes and felt like crossing a river. I got him into my truck. He collapsed against the passenger window, his chest heaving. I didn't start the engine immediately. I sat there with my hands on the wheel and looked at the side of my son's face, and I asked him, very carefully, to tell me what was happening. He talked for 40 minutes. I didn't interrupt once. The accident was real. The compression injury was real. But the prognosis, the permanent damage, the irreversible nerve destruction, was a lie. The ER physician's original assessment had been correct: 12 to 18 months of targeted rehabilitation. That was all Caleb had needed. Diane knew that before the first specialist ever set foot in the hospital. She had already been in contact with Dr. Emmett Fairclough, the Atlanta consultant, for 3 weeks before the accident. Caleb had discovered this by accident 18 months ago. In a cloud storage folder she'd accidentally shared to their joint tablet. He'd seen emails, dates that didn't line up, wire transfers he didn't recognize, and then he'd seen his own name in the subject line of a message from an insurance brokerage he'd never heard of. He had said nothing. He was still heavily medicated at that point, swimming in and out of coherence, unable to trust his own perception. He told me there were entire weeks he couldn't be sure what was real. He thought he might be losing his mind. So he waited. He studied her. And 23 days ago, he began holding his morning medication under his tongue and spitting it into the bathroom drain. Once she left the room, the fog lifted slowly, like a sky after a long rain. At night, while Diane slept, he would drag himself from the bed to the floor and force his legs to bear weight, an inch at a time, then a foot, then a full stand against the bedroom wall in the dark, shaking so hard his teeth rattled, rebuilding muscles that 6 years of forced chemical sedation had reduced to near nothing. He had been waiting for the day she would leave the house. I gripped the steering wheel until the leather creased under my hands. The rage I felt was not the hot, explosive kind. It was the slow, structural kind, the type that spreads through a building before the walls come down. I knew that kind of anger. I had spent my career learning to respect it. I asked him where he needed to go. He looked out the windshield at the Georgia pines and told me to drive to a self-storage facility on the east side of Savannah. Exit 104 off I-16, Unit 34B. He told me Diane had a key on a ring she kept in her coat pocket, but she didn't know that 3 months ago, during one of the brief windows of clarity his tapering medication allowed, he had used her key to make a duplicate while she ran an errand. We drove without speaking. The October light came through the trees in long, flat angles, and I focused on the road and tried to build a picture of who my daughter-in-law actually was. The storage unit was a 10 by 15 room, with a rolling metal door and a bare fluorescent bulb. When I pulled it up, the first thing I saw was file boxes, 11 of them stacked in 2 neat rows, each one labeled in Diane's handwriting. Behind them, a fireproof safe, the size of a small refrigerator. Caleb knew the combination. Inside the safe were documents that turned my understanding of the last 6 years completely inside out. The first thing I found was Caleb's settlement. After the accident, a civil suit against the driver of the pickup truck had resulted in a $9 million judgment. Diane had told our entire family that the money was locked in a protected medical trust, untouchable, managed by a law firm downtown, invested conservatively to fund Caleb's lifetime of care. She had shown us paperwork. She had cried when she explained it. The medical trust didn't exist. The money had been moved through 3 LLCs she incorporated in Delaware, Georgia, and Tennessee over the course of 2 years. What remained of it was sitting in a private investment account in her name alone. What she'd spent was documented in the file boxes: commercial real estate acquisitions, 2 vacation rental properties in coastal South Carolina, a 40% stake in a private ambulatory care clinic operating in Augusta. She had used my paralyzed son's settlement money to build a business portfolio while I changed his sheets and spoon-fed him his breakfast every morning for 6 years. I opened the second file box and found the insurance policies. There were 4 of them, 3 on Caleb's life, each taken out at different times through different brokers, each listing Diane as the sole beneficiary. The combined death benefit totaled $6.2 million. The 4th policy was different. It wasn't life insurance. It was a long-term disability policy with an accelerated death benefit clause, meaning it would pay out a lump sum if the insured suffered a qualifying terminal diagnosis. At the bottom of the 4th policy, clipped with a binder clip, was a single printed email. It was from Dr. Emmett Fairclough, sent 4 days before Diane left for Phoenix. Everything is prepared on my end. The diagnosis documentation will be finalized upon your confirmation. Cause: progressive neurological deterioration, consistent with long-term spinal compression syndrome. Untreatable. Estimated timeline: 6 to 8 weeks. Let me know when you want to proceed. I read that email 4 times. Then I set it down on top of the safe and looked at my son, who was sitting in my old camping chair, with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the floor. "She's not coming back from a conference," I said. "No," he said. "She's not." The silence in that storage unit was the loudest thing I have ever heard. My first instinct, the one that fired before conscious thought, was to call 911, drive to the police department, lay every document on the nearest detective's desk, and let the law take over. That's what a reasonable man does. That's what a man who trusts the system does. But I had spent 30 years in fire investigation. I understood something fundamental about evidence. It's only as good as the person presenting it and the authority receiving it. If I walked into Savannah, PD with these documents today, Diane's attorney would have a response within hours. She held Caleb's medical power of attorney. She would produce Dr. Fairclough's credentials, his board certifications, his professional reputation, and a story. A story about a confused, grief-stricken father who had constructed a conspiracy theory to explain away the tragedy of watching his son deteriorate. A story about a devoted wife who had sacrificed everything, now being persecuted by a bitter family who couldn't accept the medical reality. And Caleb, a man who was supposed to be severely neurologically impaired, suddenly walking and talking and accusing his caretaker of fraud. The legal system would look at him and see exactly what Diane had designed: an unstable, compromised patient making claims his own medical records contradicted. We needed something else. We needed her in the act. I laid it out for Caleb step by step. He listened with his coach's focus still, absorbing, thinking 3 moves ahead. We drove back to the house. What I did over the next 4 hours came from 3 decades of arson investigation. When you investigate a fire, you don't just document the scene as it is. You anticipate what the fire will do next. You get ahead of it. I had 2 personal dash cameras, high definition units I used to document fire scenes, and a set of wide-angle lenses I kept in my investigation kit. In the truck bed, I ran one camera behind the kitchen vent facing the counter where Diane always prepared Caleb's medications. I ran the second from the hallway smoke detector housing, giving it a full view of the living room and the front door. I synced both feeds to a cloud server using my personal hotspot, bypassing the home network entirely. If she accessed the router or cut the internet, The footage would continue uploading to a server in another state. Then I went to Caleb's room and we planned what came next. With the same precision I used to brief fire crews. He would be in his chair when she walked in. He would take whatever she gave him, but not swallow it. I would be visible, reading, unremarkable. The same tired old man she had dismissed for 6 years. We had 3 days before her scheduled return. She came back into. I was sitting in the living room. With a John Grisham novel, I wasn't reading when the front door opened at 11:47 on the second evening. Diane stepped in wearing a Dove gray travel jacket and pulling her cream-colored luggage. And the first thing she did before she sat down her bag before she said hello was look at the kitchen counter where Caleb's pill organizer sat. Her eyes went there before they went to either of us. I noted that 30 years of investigation taught me that what a person looks at first tells you everything about what they're thinking about most. She turned to me with a wide smile and said the conference had been cut short. Reorganization in her division. She was sorry she hadn't called ahead. She looked rested, not disappointed. Her cheeks had color. Her eyes were bright. She looked like a woman who had completed something, not interrupted it. I smiled back and told her we were glad she was home early. She crossed to Caleb's chair and stroked his hair and murmured something I couldn't hear from across the room. He sat perfectly slack, his chin low, his expression the vacant, medicated look she had designed. The camera behind the kitchen vent caught every second of it that night from my room. I watched the audio feed on my phone with an earpiece pressed deep into my ear. Canal at 12:30 in the morning. Diane sat on the edge of her bed and made a call from a phone I had never seen before. A slim burner, the kind sold prepaid at gas stations. She spoke quietly, but the microphone I had placed in the hallway vent was sensitive enough to pull her voice through the wall. She told the person on the other end that she was back early, that everything was in position, that she needed the documentation ready no later than Friday. Then she said, "Let's just get it done. I've waited long enough." I sat in the dark with that sentence pressing against my sternum like a hand. I didn't sleep. At 4 in the morning I got up, put on my boots, in my jacket, and walked out through the back door into the cold Georgia night. I drove 40 minutes to the federal building on Bull Street. The FBI field office in Savannah maintained a resident agency, a small satellite operation connected to the Atlanta field office. I had worked with them twice in my career on insurance fraud cases involving deliberate arson. The duty agent who let me in was a young woman named Special Agent Carla Desmond. She had the brisk, unimpressed manner of someone who had heard too many walk-in tips that amounted to nothing. I placed my phone on her desk, pulled up the storage unit photographs, the policy documents, the Faircloth email, and the audio clip from 40 minutes ago. She listened to the recording twice, then she picked up her desk phone and called her supervisory agent at home. What followed was 2 hours in a windowless room with 3 agents and a legal pad. I laid out every piece of the architecture, the settlement, funds, the LLCs, the insurance policies, the fabricated prognosis, the specialist's email. The late-night phone call, Agent Desmond and her supervisor, a heavy-set man named Broward, asked careful, specific questions. They were not dismissive. They were building something. Broward told me that for 14 months, the Atlanta field office had been investigating a network of medical professionals facilitating insurance fraud through manufactured diagnoses. They had the financial patterns. They had suspicious death records. What they had not been able to secure was a direct, recorded communication between the medical co-conspirator and the beneficiary, confirming intent prior to the act. I had just handed them that recording, but it wasn't enough for a federal prosecution. That would hold. A good defense attorney would call it ambiguous. She'd never used the word death, or kill, or diagnose. She said, "Get it done." She said she'd waited long enough. These were phrases, not confessions. Broward looked at me with the flat expression of a man about to ask something he knew was unreasonable. He told me I had to go back, that I had to let her proceed far enough to commit the act. That federal agents would have the house-covered vehicles on both ends of the street. A tactical team 2 blocks out. A medical unit staged at the fire station around the corner. but I could not intervene when she administered whatever she had prepared. The agents needed to recover the substance from his body and document the attempt in real time. I am 67 years old. I have pulled bodies out of buildings. I have told parents their children weren't coming home. I have sat with widows in parking lots and read insurance reports that reduced human lives to line items. That was the hardest thing anyone has ever asked me to do. I drove home in the gray pre-dawn and sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time. Then I went inside, took off my boots, and lay down on my guest room bed and stared at the ceiling until daylight came through the curtains. The next day and a half moved the way time moves before something irreversible happens. Too slow and too fast at the same time. Diane moved through the house with a particular energy. Focused, efficient, smiling at the right moments and quiet at others. She prepared Caleb's meals. She adjusted his position in the chair. She chatted with me about the Phoenix weather and a restaurant she'd apparently loved near the convention center. I said the right things. I asked the right questions. I poured her coffee and passed her the newspaper and played the part of the grateful, exhausted father-in-law who had no idea what was coming. On Friday evening, she went to the kitchen, pantry, and came out with a small nylon case I had never seen before. She unzipped it at the counter, with her back partially turned to me. I kept my eyes on the television, but in my peripheral vision, I could see her working with a vial and a syringe, not a pill organizer, not a smoothie, a syringe. The camera behind the vent was recording. She walked into the living room with the syringe cupped in her palm, the needle cap still on, moving with the easy confidence of a woman who had done this before or had rehearsed it so many times in her mind that it felt like memory. She knelt beside Caleb's chair. Her voice went to that high soft register. She called him sweetheart. She said it was time for his evening treatment, that the new medication would help him sleep more deeply, that he deserved some rest. I sat in my armchair with the Grisham novel open in my lap, and I gripped the pages hard enough to crease them, and I did not move. She reached for the port in his 4-line, a line she had installed through a home health order 3 months ago. One more piece of infrastructure she had quietly put in place for exactly this moment. She removed the needle cap. The front door came off its hinges. The sound was absolute, not a knock, not a shout first, just the full mechanical concussion of a forced entry executed by people who had practiced it. The door frame split. 3 agents in tactical vests came through the opening. In less than 2 seconds, flashlight beams crossing the room, voices stacked on top of each other, giving commands. Diane lurched backward. The syringe hit the hardwood floor and skittered under the coffee table. 2 agents had her arms before she recovered her balance. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She tried for about 4 seconds to compose her face into the expression of a terrified, innocent woman, but the agents were already cuffing her. And Agent Desmond was already walking through the door with an evidence bag, and the moment Diane understood that the recording device had been in this house the whole time, that everything had been seen and heard, the performance stopped. She looked at me with pure cold contempt, not anger, not betrayal, contempt. Like a contractor who has been caught using substandard materials and is annoyed at the inconvenience of being noticed. She said nothing to me. She had nothing left that would work on me. 2 agents walked her out through the broken doorway. I crossed the room to my son. Caleb was breathing hard, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair, and when I put my hand on his shoulder, he reached up and grabbed my wrist, the way a man grabs something when he's afraid of what he might do if he lets go. She's gone, I told him. He nodded once. His jaw was locked tight. He was shaking, but he was present, completely, entirely present. No fog, no drift, just my son in his chair. On the other side of the worst 6 years of his life, the paramedics came and checked him over. The syringe was collected and sent for analysis. Agent Desmond walked me through the next steps in a tone that was clinical, but not unkind. Dr. Emmett Fairclough was arrested at his Atlanta practice the same hour. 2 more associates in the fraud network were picked up before morning. Diane was charged at the federal level: attempted murder, insurance fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, unlawful imprisonment. Her attorney filed the expected motions. None of them landed. The recordings, the documentation, the physical evidence, and Dr. Fairclough's cooperation agreement made her defense largely symbolic. She was convicted on all counts 14 months later. The judge sentenced her to 38 years without possibility of early release. I sat in the third row of that courtroom and watched the bailiff walk her out, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Nothing. The clean, empty nothing. Of something being genuinely finished. The road back for Caleb was not easy or fast, and I want to be honest about that, because I think stories owe people the truth of what recovery actually looks like. It took 3 months before he could walk the length of the hallway unassisted. 6 months before he could manage stairs. A year before he went back to the high school not to coach. Not yet, but to sit in the bleachers and watch his former assistant run a Friday night game. The players found out he was there at halftime. 32 of them came up into the bleachers and stood around him in a semicircle. These enormous young men in muddy jerseys, not sure what to say. Caleb looked at them and said, "Boys, it's good to be back." They won the game by 2 touchdowns. I am 67 years old. I spent 30 years in fire investigation, and the thing I learned, the thing that never changes no matter how many scenes you work, is that the most destructive fires are not the ones that start loudly. They're the ones that start in the walls, in the hidden spaces, burning through the structure slowly and silently, while everything on the surface looks fine. The people who want to harm you most are very rarely the ones you don't trust. They are almost always the ones you trust completely. Pay attention when something feels wrong inside a situation that looks right. A loving caregiver does not isolate. A devoted partner does not require your helplessness to function. Trust your gut, even when every credential and every smile in the room tells you you're wrong. And if you ever find yourself living inside someone else's careful design, know that the truth has a way of finding its own exit, even when every door has been locked. Have you ever realized that someone you trusted was not who you believed them to be? Tell me about it in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. If this story stayed with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.